Hello everyone. Welcome to webinar entitled Getting Published in High Impact Journals, What Authors Ought to Know About Academic Publishing Best Practices by Dr. Naidu, who is a prominent scholar in the field of open and distance learning and editor-in-chief in Distance Education Journal, which is a Q1 SACI journal. We are currently celebrating the 14th anniversary of open and distance learning at Anadolu University. And this webinar is a part of ongoing and upcoming events planned to celebrate this milestone. It is true that Anadolu University ODL system is 40 years old, but as the time passes, we are being more dynamic and getting younger. Started 40 years ago at Eskişehir, we are now a giga university delivering education around 3 million students each year and operating both locally and globally. We are proud of what we accomplished, and academic publishing is crucial in terms of telling and reporting our experiences. In this sense, we believe that this webinar will be highly effective for many of us. Dr. Naidu, we are eager to learn more about your thoughts and benefit from your experiences regarding publishing processes in high-impact journals. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Aros. Thank you very much for the introduction and the invitation to present this seminar. It's really an honor, and I'm looking forward to being able to talk to so many of you online, and especially those who are outside of Turkey and outside of Eskişehir. I've been having a great time here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. In addition to that, I've titled this presentation Getting Published in High Impact Journals, but obviously any journal would also fit the scheme. But more importantly, we wanted to focus on what editors think that authors need to know about academic publishing, especially in the open, flexible, and distance learning field, but education more generally. I would even extend it to the social sciences as well, and broadly speaking to any other area of educational research as well. The first caveat that I want to put out there is that I'm one piece of advice among several. Recently, over the last 2 years, I was part of a team that published a book called What Journal Editors Wish Authors Knew About Academic Publishing, published by the Association for the Advancement of Computing and Education, an American outfit that most of you would know. And the link to that book is available there. In that book, you will find a chapter by myself and chapters along those lines by, I think, 10 or 15 other groups of editors. So it's a good place to go to if you are looking for general advice as well as specific advice on getting published, researching, writing in any kind of journal in this area. A few other pieces of good advice I would point to is an editorial that I wrote around 2015 about an idea which has been on my mind for a very long time, which is things that we are not learning or choosing to ignore from our past. And that's a very common trend, which I will come to in a minute again. And again, around 2015, again, I used the word too many times, I wrote a piece on methodological issues in educational research. So what I'm trying to stress here is that the things that I say to you today is one piece of advice, and I think you should canvass, and be wise for you to canvass more broadly about advice, and various other people will have similar sorts and different kinds of advice on writing, researching, and getting published in these kinds of journals. So with those kinds of caveats, let me get going. And this is the very important point. The most important point that I want to make is that whenever you are setting about to do or undertake a piece of research, remember that you are joining a group of people. You're joining a group of people who are having a conversation about that topic. it will be very rare that you'll be talking about something that is entirely new. So you'll probably be talking about something that other people have said something about already, and you probably want to say something different or new about it, or even a summarization of what others have said. So joining that conversation is a large part of what we do as researchers. And this is why it is very important to be aware of what other people have said. And most submissions, as far as I'm concerned, in my experience, are rejected because they make little or no contribution to the conversation that is going on. Take, for example, attrition or dropout or feedback, anyone, or technology. And if your article, or your piece of research is not saying anything new about that topic, that specific topic, then editors will be pressed hard to justify its publication. And therefore, contextualizing your research within that conversation is very important. You need to satisfy yourself, and you need to satisfy your readers that what you are doing is worth investigating. There is something that is missing. What is the gap? What is the gap in the literature that we need to concentrate our efforts on? Therefore, how do you get to that point? And obviously, the answer to that question is the literature review. The literature review is very critical as part of our graduate education. We will have all been drilled into how to conduct a literature review or write up a literature review. However, I find in my experience that a lot of the efforts at literature review is rather poor, and that is a failure on the part of so many directions. I will not go into that, but I will emphasize the importance of the literature review in trying to understand the conversation that I was talking about, that you're making a contribution to. A literature review is not simply a summary of what other people have said. That is a summary, is exactly that. When you're trying to do an academic critical literature review, then you are critically analyzing that summary. Most often I find in my experience that people will basically give you a summary of, Naidu said this, Bogart said this, or Oscar said this, or whoever said this, or Smith said that. That is basically listing a whole bunch of things that you have read, and you're trying to say who has said what. Now, that is not a good literature review. Many people would argue the same. What is a good literature review is a critical analysis of what other people have said. And it needs to follow an argument. It needs to be coherent. It needs to say what the issues are, not who said what. So begin by saying what was said, and then by who. So you make the point, and then you put the reference at the end. And most of us would follow the APA referencing style. This is a very important point. So the question you might say was, what is a critical review? And this is what I'm saying. A critical literature review is one that makes the point first and then cites the reference. So it's a simple rule of thumb. Don't begin with the person first in your sentence. Begin with the point first, and then put the reference in the end of it. And you find that your argument, your critical analysis of the literature review will then follow a narrative, will be coherent. You will be making an argument. So once you have sort of argued the literature or critically analyzed the literature that way, you will naturally come up with some gaps in the literature. You will naturally be able to say, these things have been realized, these things are known. However, here is something that we don't know. Here's a weakness. So your research questions will actually fall out of a good literature review. Oftentimes, I find research questions sometimes in the introduction, sometimes somewhere else in the paper. Your literature review your research question should follow the literature review. It's only after the review of the literature that you know what is worth investigating and what is not worth investigating. Some of the areas, and this is the other point, so relevance is very important. A lot of the times we find that people spend a lot of time trying to undertake work that is not really worth investigating, not from the editor's point of view, but from the community's point of view. Why, the question that you need to ask yourself is, why does the community need to know what you are working on? What is the benefit in it? And how many members of the community do you think will be interested in? So the more members of the community you think will be interested in what you're researching, the greater the chances are of your article being published. Because as an editor, one is always looking at the scale of the impact. The more widely the article or the research is going to be read, the more promising its chances are for getting published. And in this little slide, I put out 6 areas that you might think, and I would suggest are worth focusing. For example, number 1 is engagement of learners with the subject matter content. And sure, learner content engagement happens all the time in every kind of learning environment. But you might argue that the dynamics of learner content engagement in open, flexible, and online learning environments is very different because of the separation of the learners and because of the mediation that goes on. So the dynamics are different, and that's worth investigating with or without the use of technology. And similarly with the engagement of learners with teachers, learners with learners, and learners with the learning environment, learners with assessment activities, learners with feedback. Any educational research, I would say, these are very generic things. These should be investigated everywhere. But in the case of open and flexible learning, what is different about these sorts of things? For example, let's say, take number 4, learner engagement with the learning environment. In the open, flexible, distance learning, this is mediated through use of technology, mobile devices, which is where mobile learning comes from, Wi-Fi, or innovative use of the study space, flexible time, pace, and place of study. All those things become relevant when you are in the open, flexible, distance education environment, and they are worth investigating. But I'm not the first one saying that they are worth investigating. These things have been investigated before. So your challenge then as a researcher is to try and figure out, what is it that we don't know about learner engagement with the learning environment? What is it that we don't know about learner engagement with assessment activity? And I will promise you that editors will jump at it. If you say something unique, if you say something different, if you say something, or if you investigate something that is unique, if you investigate something that is new, hasn't been said, hasn't been explored, not completely, but not all that much. It doesn't mean that you have to be working on something that is completely different. You could be working on something where not much attention has been paid, you could argue, and that will maximize or optimize your chances of publication. So once you have figured that out, then trying to ask the right research question is very critical. And this is a point that we tend to struggle with quite a bit. What is your research question? And even more, the second important point is, why bother with it? Who needs to know? And this was the point that I made earlier on. Ask yourself this. Satisfy yourself that the research question that you have come up with is important. It's important from the community's point of view, and they will benefit from it. And I think those things are worth dwelling upon. But more importantly, when you are writing your question down, be sure it's a researchable question. And let me dwell on that a little bit. All research questions are not necessarily researchable. Remember, we are, at the end of the day, scientists, one way or the other. We're not natural scientists. We're not studying plants or animals or the physical world, but we're scientists because we're studying processes and principles and the impact of those kinds of things. So when you are writing down a research question, be sure that the question can be answered reliably and validly, with valid tools and reliably. And this will take us towards methodology. We can always ask questions like I've often cited this example. We can ask questions, for example, does God exist? Yeah, it's a good question, but how would you answer the question? Are you going to go and ask 10 people, does God exist? And go and ask another 10 people, does God exist? Where does that lead you? That kind of data is not going to pass the review process. And this is what I mean by saying that the fate of a submission is sealed long before it is submitted to publication consideration. And this was the title of the chapter that I wrote in that book that I was talking about, that if the building blocks of your research question is not sound, is not convincing, then no matter what kind of gloss you put on your article, improvement to the language or graphic design or pictures or animation, chances are that your paper will not pass the test. And I think that is a very important point that we should dwell on. In relation to that, therefore, what I basically say is the methodology is very important, whatever methodology. I'm not a quantitative guy nor a qualitative guy. People try to put themselves in those kinds of camps. The choice of your research method will depend on the nature of your question. If your question requires the collection of quantitative data or requires setting up an experiment where you have a treatment group as opposed to a control group, or one of or more or a few of those, or it requires you to understand the entire context where ethnographic research might be more appropriate. So don't worry so much about the methodology. I've seen so many people try and collect data before they know why they are collecting data. You need to go through all those things that I was talking about, review the literature, identify a problem, and define your research question. Make sure your research question is researchable. And then only sit down and think about, well, okay, if this is what I want to investigate, how am I going to go and collect data? Or what kinds of tools would I require? Maybe you might require a combination of tools, both quantitative and qualitative data. And I think, that's when you need to think about your methodology. So methodological rigor is very important. Because we are scientists, because we are trying to convince a community of people that what we are doing is worth doing, your methodology cannot be weak, because that's your foundation. That's what any professional, be it lawyers or doctors or accountants, will need to be sure about. Because when you are standing somewhere making a presentation like I'm making, or when you are submitting your work for review, you have to convince a group of your peers, that's what peer review is about, that what you have done is sound, solid, and worthwhile to the community that we are talking about. So here is a very important point. Making sure that your research methodology matches your research question is very important, whatever methodology. And it's very important to be competent. I heard someone say to me in my early careers that if you want to be a researcher, make sure you know that you have competence in the tools of the research, which is knowing how to use quantitative tools, data analysis techniques or qualitative data gathering tools. If you don't have expertise or competence in the research method or the tools of collecting data, then you will not be able to. You'll find it very difficult to say something convincing or produce convincing evidence in relation to the research question. I know some people would argue that, I can come up with a great idea and I can get research assistants to collect my data, analyze my data. But I would think that is passing the buck onto somebody else. If you want to be a researcher, then it is important that you yourself have the command of the tools of doing research. Otherwise, you cannot be a competent researcher, I would like to suggest. So research method is very important. And this is one of the greatest failings of graduate education programs in many countries that I've seen. I think that this is my hypothesis or my sense is that, a graduate education program should place emphasis, equal amount of emphasis on teaching research methods as content knowledge. Oftentimes we place too much attention on content knowledge, be it instructional design or be it technology or computing or whatever, and we just give 1 or 2 courses on research methods and expect that after coming out with a master's degree or a PhD degree that we are going to be researchers. It is arguable, and I've had this argument before, that the balance between methods courses and content courses should be almost 50-50, but we can have that conversation at some other place at some other time. Some of the common reasons, and I've alluded to many of these reasons already, and some of it is repetition as well, but an article makes no real contribution to the topic or to the understanding of the topic. It's not properly contextualized. Articles sent to the wrong journal. This is a very common problem. We tend to send things that we think, it's a great article. It may be a great article, but when an editor is faced with, say, a lot of articles, then the one that goes out is one that is of least relevant to the scope of the journal, even though it might be bordering on it, but the one that I take out is one that is probably somewhere else, not here, and then you would think all your time and effort is wasted. So pay attention to that, that's very important. And oftentimes, make sure that, you're targeting the right audience. If you're writing a serious journal article, which is a feature article, which has got data, a lot of articles will fail to get published because they don't have scientifically collected data. Data is important, otherwise, it will not be rigorous enough to make your case. Remember, I was making this point that, data will provide validity and reliability and generalizability to your research question, whatever it might have been. Make sure that you don't forget little things like, publication style of the journal. Make sure that word count. Some journal editors are very particular about this. Some journals are very particular about this. Others are more liberal. They will say 7,000 words, but they will accept something that is 8,000 words. They will say 7,000 words, they might accept something that is 5,000 words. And it does not pain to check with the editor. It says, look, I've got 10,000 words. Instead of chopping it now, would you like to consider it? And then we can make, and I would like to go that way. So don't be too much of a rush to conform to the word count. Make the changes based on the editorial advice, and sometimes, depending on the nature of your article, editors will be a bit more lenient and say, well, you might need 10,000 words to justice to this article, and I've done that myself. So be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Feel free to talk to the editors. They're usually good ones. Will usually respond, and I do very frequently respond to people quickly with an email. And pay attention to things like plagiarism and ethics and integrity. They're important things that can get you into a lot of trouble, and I've seen that more than once. So pay attention to those kinds of things. But there's a couple more things that I will say before we move into questions, and especially for new people who are not familiar with some of these things or may not be familiar with some of these things. One is this idea of open access. More and more journals, commercial journals, as well as other kinds of journals, are trying to publish content or articles in the open access mode. Now, this is a more recent development as part of the open education phenomenon, and this means that articles can be and will be can be made available without having to pay a subscription fee to access those articles. So there are many journals which will publish articles that are freely available, that you don't have to subscribe and pay for it. But it doesn't stop there. It comes with a variety of options, you know, and two kinds of open access are often regarded as gold open access and green open access. If you're familiar with it, so bear with me, but if you're not familiar with it, it's worth checking it out. When your article is categorized as gold open access, which means that you've actually paid the publishers an article processing fee or article processing charge, normally referred to as APC, and more organizations, institutions, and publishing houses are charging authors to pay. I mean, now that's not such a bad idea. I mean, there's a lot of depth in trying to understand why they are charging that fee. But oftentimes these fees can be bundled in your research grant. So if your research if you're applying for a research grant, make sure that you apply or you factor in your APC, which could be as much as $1,000 or more. And this can be included in your grant, and then you pay that to the journals which require you to pay that fee. So that's gold open, which means that as soon as your article is published, you know, it is available, free, and easily openly accessible by anyone once you've paid that APC. The green open access is that your article can be published, but after an embargo period, which might differ from, say, 2 months to 3 months, then you can publish a copy of that article on your local repository, such as your website or institution's website. So that's the basic difference between gold and green open access. But more importantly, when we talk about open, doesn't mean just open slather. It comes in a variety of forms. And I'll spend a bit of time on this one. Looks like we have time. So I'll go through again. If you're familiar with this, then please bear with me. But if you're not, then it is worth checking it out. That the type of license that goes with open access, you know, the one that I was talking about here, both gold and green, you can specify the kind of license that you are giving. See, traditionally, it was a dichotomous arrangement. If it was copyrighted, then people will have to seek permission from you or the publisher to do anything with it. If it was not copyrighted, then it was on the public domain, then people could do anything with it. But when you are adopting Creative Commons license, and you can just go to this site on Wikipedia and read about it, it comes in a variety of forms, such as CC BY. CC BY is like, you know, it's open, it's the most open form, and whatever you do to it, you share the same way as the original author shared it. So you attribute, but you attribute it to the person. So attribution is still there. That is an important point. It doesn't mean that if you've written an article and you make it available freely to other people, that means people can do anything with it. No, people can do anything with it, but they have to make sure that it is your work that they are adopting and adapting. So your initial authorship is not lost, and that is an important point. No derivative means that, you know, that you cannot change that work that was that was in original form, and share alike, as I was saying, you should be willing to share it the same way the original author shared it. Non-commercial means you cannot make money out of it, so you can use it and share it, you can change it, but you can't make money out of it. So you can control the kind of permissions you give. You can say, all right, here's my work. As long as you attribute me, you can do whatever with it, but make sure that, you know, you don't disturb the form of it, that this is the way it is, but you can't, you know, modify it. And if you modify it, well, then that's your work, and you need to then seek permissions appropriate to do that. You cannot make money out of it. So you can control the kinds of permissions that you can give. And that's the difference between the traditional copyright. Again, I'm rushing through this, so if you're not familiar with this, it is worth checking out, because it will have implication on how you publish your work. And one final point before we move on is after publication. So as researchers, we think that, you know, we spend a lot of time on doing research, and we write these papers, and we publish it, and then what? Well, there is something more that you can do about it, and this is what publishers are now beginning to call DIY PR, which is like do it yourself, like, you know, like a handyman, do it yourself, as opposed to getting a contractor to fix your house or something like that. That you can promote your own work. Now, that's a fine line. Some people might argue that I should not be promoting my own work, but you know, it depends on how you promote your work. If you promote your work in a respectful and considered way, then that's okay. That's what publishers are saying. And this is the whole movement, what we call about metrics, and so it's a different kind of metric. Traditional metrics was how many times your paper is cited, who is reading it, but alt metrics is, you know, promoting your paper in social media. So all other things, like, for example, we see a lot of people these days, you know, if you published a recent paper or opinion piece, you put it in your email signature or on your website or your LinkedIn profile or Twitter. You know, it's okay to promote your work. After all, listen, we are researchers. We are paid to carry out research, especially if you're working in a research institute, if an academic environment. That's a large part of your job. Well, most of what we do as academics is research and scholarship. So promoting your work so that it reaches the widest audience is with care and caution is part and parcel of the work that you do. You know, speak to your institution, promote your work. You know, put a news item out. You know, if it is the kind of research, you might think, like, if you're doing some research that you think will really impact the nature of schooling or the nature of early childhood education or government funding or something like that. And it will pay to follow those things up, and I see people doing that all the time. Newspapers will always attract attention to opinion pieces. So write an opinion piece based on your article, you know, or put a link to it on your webpage. So this idea of promoting your own work with care and caution is becoming more and more prominent, and we would encourage people to engage in that if you're early career researchers. Fundamentally, the point that I'm making finally is that you can raise the profile of your own research. Don't wait for the publishers to do that. Don't wait for, you know, people to cite your research. I mean, obviously, you know, that's how impact factors, and something I didn't talk about, is calculated, but you know, impact factor is one measure of success, or one measure of the value of your research. I mean, there are other ways in which you can make sure that your work is valuable to the community. It begins with what I was saying earlier on, and trying to identify what is worth researching and what it worth talking about. So listen, I could go on a lot about many of these things, but I think it might be best to stop here and answer some burning questions, you know, that you might have based on what I've said, or anything that I haven't said. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Somnaudi. It was a privilege to listen to your experience and suggestions. We have some questions, and I would like to ask you them one by one. And the first three questions will be raised by myself. The first one is an easy yes/no question. In fact, as an editor, I am also exposed to that question. I'm asking to confirm my response. Is there a formula or recipe to publish in high-impact journals? Can we make it happen with some magic and spelling? I said that there isn't such magic, but it would be great to hear your confirmation.
Well, I would hate to be trapped into giving you a yes/no answer. My initial response would have been, no, there is no one formula, but I will give you an answer. And I think that the answer to that would be never, ever compromise on quality.
Yeah.
You do good quality work, the rest of the things will take care of itself.
I think that should be the main criteria in all the academic works. We should put our best effort so that we can produce high quality content. The second question, what do you think about the myth about the second reviewer? Are they really exist, or when our papers are rejected, do we tend to blame the second reviewer instead of blaming ourselves?
That's a tricky one, you know. And I look, we've had this conversation before. Reviewers are like people like you and I, and their views will differ. I mean, there is no assurance that a person who has read your article and perhaps doesn't like one or two things and gives you a poor report, that your article is generally poor. I mean, you know, peer review is exactly that. You know, two people or two or more people will look at your work and judge that, you know, it's a good piece of work. But if the chips don't fall the right way, you could get two people who basically don't like, you know, what you're researching, and you can't please everyone. And then your article might not get up. But you know what? You can guard against some of those things. And some of the basic things that you can guard against, I have belabored already. I think two things. I think methodological rigor is very important, right? Make sure, as I say, we're scientists, right? We're not just, you know, standing in front of the corner of the road and preaching willy-nilly about what we think is right and what is wrong with this world. Whatever we say as researchers has to be conducted in a scientifically rigorous way, because that's the way we would argue that, you know, if because I've done these things, I'm able to say X, Y, and Z. And the previous point that I was making is make sure it's making a valuable contribution. So two things, if you get those two things right, if you are talking about an important topic, if you are working on an important topic which needs to be researched, and you have scientifically, validly and reliably prosecuted that research question, then I will guarantee you almost that paper will be published.
Okay, thank you. And here is the third question, again raised by me. You know, you mentioned in your presentation, if the fate of a submission is often sealed long before it is submitted for publication, what would you suggest to MA and PhD students? What would sharpen their skills to write quality journal articles?
Yeah. I'll go back to this idea. Learn how to do a good literature review. You know, that if I were a master's student, I would require all my master's students to take a course on conducting and carrying out a literature review, a whole course on it, or maybe more. You know, learn how to write a good literature review. It's a narrative. It's not a summary of what other people have said. You can go to the library, you can go to database, get 12 articles and just summarize all those articles. That's not a literature review. You need to make a case. You need to make a point. Of course, you have to do the summary first. Do the summary first, but then write a story about it. What is the story? What is your story? What are you seeing in that literature? What are you not seeing in the literature? And carefully crafting that literature. If you do that, it's publishable on its own. I published many literature reviews by myself and by other people on the knowledge that exists in a field. So I think, you know, being able to do a good literature review, then coming up with reliable research questions or good research questions is very important. You know, how many times, you know, PhD students and master's students will come to your room as professors and say, well, I'm not sure what I want to study. And they will spend weeks and months, you know, and I have done that too, you know. I mean, you know, when I was a graduate student, we was wonder about, you know, oh, so what am I going to do my PhD thesis on? What am I going to do with this? And you think about a topic, well, that's the wrong place to start. You should be reading voraciously. Let the literature tell you where you should start. So if I said to the library, if I went there and just started reading broadly and widely, gee, this is taking me onto a tangent. You know, one of the best things that I went through when I was doing my PhD in North America, the PhD requires you to do a bunch of courses, and then after the course, what they do is a comprehensive examination. So the British system doesn't do that, and I found it very useful in the American system is that both Canadian and the US system. So for 3 months, a committee of examiners will set you a reading list. So you do nothing but for 3 months just read and read and read and read, and then people will examine you on those 2 or 3 topics, again, in a very open-ended way. But what that experience made me do was read things that I would have never read otherwise. And so after 3 months after doing your basic coursework requirement, then you did your comprehensive examination, you then feel like, okay, I have got good command of these areas, whatever those areas. In my case, or in those days, one of those areas was, 2 of those was compulsory and 1 was option. So 2 of those areas, you know, depending on what your choices are, you would be asked questions on, and one was your choice of area that you wanted to investigate, so that there's consistency amongst candidates. So it's only after you've done the coursework and you've done that kind of reading that you are aware of the field, and you know what the field needs, and then you start writing your research proposal after you've done it. So your comprehensive examination is in many ways the literature review that I'm talking about, and that's what I like about the North American system of PhD as opposed to the European, I might like to add, but British system and the Australian system is similar. It's like you come in with a master's degree and boom, straight away you go into doing your dissertation or your thesis. And I believe that it doesn't prepare you adequately with the tools and the command of the field to be able to identify, in most cases, a worthwhile research question. So my in a long-winded way, what I'm saying to early career researchers is make sure that you have the command of your field, a detailed understanding of your very narrow topic, whatever it might be, because that will allow you to put your finger on something. As I was saying earlier on, that doesn't mean that you are the only person who would have thought about some topic, that, you know, it's okay to pick a topic where a few other people have also focused attention on, but it is something that you could argue that has not been researched well, or that there's something missing here. So when you are in that kind of solid footing, that's what I mean by your building blocks. That means you're putting down a very solid concrete pole in the ground, and that these are the things that will carry you through later in life. If you don't pick a topic that is worthwhile, that the majority of people will be interested, then no matter what kind of gloss or linguistic finish you put onto it later, you know, that the reviewers will say, well, why should I bother? So if I have, as an editor, at any point in time, if I have 20 articles to choose from, which are all great, the one that is of least interest to the community is the one that is going to go, no matter. It might have been very well conducted and properly carried out. The one that goes out is one that is of least interest to the peer reviewers and to the readership and to the editors. Remember, the editors will have voting rights as well. You know, so first past the post is the editor. So make sure that you're working on something that is worthwhile, that is worth investigating, that that is topical, that the majority of people would be interested in, or a large number of people would be interested in it. And then you are making sure that you have got scientific methods which have been applied to collect the data. See, if you've got those building blocks in process, then I would be very surprised that your article will be rejected. It'll be published, if not in one of the journals, in some other journal, because the building blocks of your research are sound. And that's a lot. That's the bulk of what we do as researchers. That's research training. So if you're doing a PhD, or if you've done a PhD, you should be experts at that. If you're not, then something deficient in your training, or something deficient how we train graduate students. And I've begun to feel sometimes that a lot of graduate schools are failing at equipping our students with enough methodological rigor, enough training in reviewing literature, and then when they come out, they don't have the skill to do the research, and therefore they're writing sloppy articles that don't get published, and you wonder why. This is where we've fallen down, both as researchers ourselves and educators as research trainers ourselves, if you're working in a faculty. So it's a bit of a long-winded answer to your question, Aris, but
thank you for extended response. And this webinar is also streaming on YouTube, and there is a question from YouTube channel. Actually, Müyesser Ceylan, she is a faculty member in Faculty of Education at Anadolu University. She is asking, how would you explain the editor's reason, like your research has no international value?
Sorry, say that again, Aris.
Sometimes some of the articles are rejected, and in some cases, editors make a comment like saying your research has no international value.
Well, which is what I was saying, isn't it? Value. But look, just having said that, it's a judgment, isn't it? And I'm the first one to admit that editors may have got it wrong. It's possible that and it happens to me all the time. Okay, I sit in Australia. I publish a journal that started in Australia, but it's pretty international right now. But still, the journal is very focused on the Western world because it's in the English language. So most of the articles come from North America, US or Canada, because that's where the money is, that's where the corpus of the largest number of researchers are. And then the UK, and then Australia, and maybe one or two from New Zealand or other English-speaking world. So you will get an article, we will get an article from, say, China or Turkey or Saudi Arabia or Africa or some part of the world. And then it might be very parochial. They might be looking at, and some examples come to mind is some researchers are writing a paper and submitting a paper that is based on nurses students' experience of online learning in Palestine or in Turkey. So then the reviewer says, well, who wants to know about nurses students' experience with online learning in Turkey? Good question, isn't it? Why is it important? Why do you think an American reader would be interested in nurses students' experience of online learning in Turkey? And that is when you might get a response like that. So the question then goes back to is why were you researching nurses students' experience of online learning in Turkey? What was the point? What was missing? What were you investigating? So you go back to the building blocks of that piece of research. And then you might say, no, this is a very important topic. It's a very important topic for Turkey. Then you should be sending that article to a Turkish journal, not to an international journal that is focused on somewhere else. Chances of getting that research, if you still think that is a worthwhile research, the forum for that would be then somewhere in Turkey, because that's where people will see the value of that research.
Perhaps, it's also author's responsibility to justify their article. So rather than only focusing findings and discussion, we should also justify and write a rationale for our article. Thank you, Dr. Naidu. We don't have any questions, and now we would like to virtually present you a letter of appreciation. My friends, now it is on the screen. We will also deliver that certificate in person. And if you have any final comments or remarks, please go ahead.
Oh, I don't really have any final comments. Since we have a bit of time, you know, there's a lot more that goes on into researching, writing, and getting published, and in another. If you give another opportunity, I could talk more about the business of publishing. I mean, today I tried to concentrate on simple tips of getting the building blocks right. So it was directed more at graduate students and perhaps, you know, academics who are working with graduate students and trying to help them become better researchers. But the publishing world is fast evolving, so I might take a bit of time to make a few comments on that, since we've got a few more minutes left. And this has to do with some of the comments that I made already about open access publishing and altmetrics and things like that, because more and more now there's a lot of pressure on the academic publishing world to open up access to research to the wider community. I know not so much about it, but I think there is some movement in the European context by way of a plan called Plan S, which is going to require, and you can check this out yourself, which will require organizations and publishers to publish everything open access using those licenses that I was talking about. So if publishers are going to be required to publish things open access, then they will say, well, somebody's got to pay for it. So either the institution pays for that, or funding organizations pay for that, is something that is going to have to be factored in the funding of organizations and in the funding of researchers and research in organizations. Now, this is a higher level thinking on what the future of research and research appointments, how are academics going to be appointed? For example, if you are going to appoint an academic as an associate professor or professor, and everything that person publishes is arguable that needs to be open access, then the minute you try and submit something to a publisher, the publisher will say, well, you have to pay for it. So where is the money coming from? So the money will have to come from the departments. The departments will have to now, or the faculties will have to make money available for researchers to publish, because very soon it'll be a requirement for publication in big publishing houses like Taylor and Francis or elsewhere or Springer. They will all require compulsorily for authors to pay for anything that you want to get published. So where is that money coming from? So it has an implication from departmental funding. It will have an implication on research grants. It will have an implication on government funding and government support. And even so, it could have implications on the appointment of professors and associate professors in academic roles, because a large part of their work is getting a research published. So I think the world is going to change. The publishing world is changing already and is going to change a lot. And this is something that editors are aware of, especially those of us who publish with commercial publishers, are aware of these kinds of conversations that are going on. And publishers are very aware of it, and they are having conversations with editors about how these things will be rolled out and panned out. And these are very uncertain times in the publishing world, because it really changes the traditional model of publishing. And dare I say, this is making publishers a bit nervous, because for a long time, you know, they were in this model whereby, can I tell you a little bit of one small story? I mean, recently, I got an invitation by a publisher to publish, to edit a handbook. And when I saw the contract, I said, this contract is not suitable for the current time, because it basically says that you'll be the editor, we'll give you some royalty if we make money on the sale of the books, but it's your responsibility to go and seek authors to publish in this book free of charge, you know. So my question to the publisher is that you are asking me to go and ask 20 or 30 researchers to voluntarily, you know, prepare book chapters that we will edit and publish in this book, that you are going to go and sell it back to us and make money out of it. So where is the motivation for researchers in this, you know? So I think that model of publishing that I've just described is going to be outdated for the current for the contemporary publishing world and in the future. So this is going to change a lot, and it has implications on, as I was just saying, not just researchers, but departments, faculties, and in fact governments that fund research and fund universities. So that is another part of the conversation, that it's another presentation that we need to have some time for. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Naidu. I see many messages in the chat box and YouTube streaming. They appreciate your contribution and they thank you. And I also would like to thank, on behalf of the faculty members at Anadolu University and PhD and MA students, thank you for being here as a part of our fellowship program and sharing your experiences.
Take a picture.
Right. Okay, someone from the team probably is.
Come on, Ashley-Ann can take a picture. She's very good at taking
guys,
pictures.
If you are available, you can turn on your camera. You can take a screen shot.
Smile. You can put your picture on.
All right.
Okay. Come on. Don't be shy.
Just give them one more second.
Yeah. Got it? Any more? No more? Should I wait?
I think the rest of the people can be a bit shy.
Oh, there's more coming. There's more brave souls coming. Oh, you're all beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
We thank you, sir. Thank you.